It burned like hell. Sometimes it would rain. It wasn't a problem, until one day it was. "Drink more water," said Dominic as he listened to my cries and curses. "Smartass," I snapped. "You're not the one peeing liquid fire." "Trust me, you need to drink more water to flush out the bacteria." "That's easy for you to say. You men with your long, infection-resistant urethras," I cried in frustration. "Why, thank you kindly. It is long," Dominic grinned. "But seriously, drink more water." Heavy rain. We stood under a colorful canopy that had the words "Renee's Shop" written above it. "This is not real rain," said Renee, who came out to join us. "What is it then?" I asked sarcastically. "Snow? Petals drifting gently down from the trees?" "No," Renee was stubborn. "Real rain floods houses, sweeps away trees, and contaminates wells." The next day was sunny, and the mud dried into passable road. We took our time and were able to just enjoy the ride. Meetings. It was easy to forget we weren't alone in the jungle, but then an animal would spring into the road, or a human would appear. We talked. The people were curious, or they were thirsty, or both. If they were on the road like us, they were willing to talk. I struggled to remember words and languages I'd never really learned properly, but Dominic seemed to be capable of basic conversations without any problem. I watched him. At first, I expected him to twist everything with his broad Texan accent, but I was quite surprised to hear it disappeared when he started talking. He talked, he smiled, he exchanged water for pineapples, and one time we got a hand-drawn map with obstacles marked on it. Roadside Attractions. In Bhuta, we were directed to the old school to make camp. When I opened my eyes the next morning, I was met by the stares of the entire village. They were all stood in front of the school, looking at us. The kids were pointing and laughing. I woke up Dominic. "Dom," I kicked him in the back. "Dom, wake up." And before I knew it, he was upright, fully awake, and ready for action. The kids ran off, screaming and laughing. "See what you've done?" I said with scorn. "Now go outside and say sorry, or they'll think you're a white devil." We spent half a day there, sitting with everyone, eating and talking. They were curious about us, and I was curious about them. I could feel my old self coming back, listening to people, being patient, being careful with the questions I asked, observing more than talking. You have to let them trust you, let them want to share their life stories with you, let them explain their reality to you so you can pass on their stories to others. The traffic jam. It was the middle of nowhere in the jungle in the heart of Africa, and we were stuck in a traffic jam. Are you kidding me? There was a huge hole in the road full of rainwater that had sucked in 2 trucks. They sat there like huge, squatting frogs. Their wheels spun wildly, flinging mud in the air, but they weren't going anywhere anytime soon. One of the locals guided us through his neighbor's backyard and offered us some tea. His wife complained about the irresponsibility of the truckers, who obviously hadn't wanted to pay for help. What did she mean? I asked Dominic later. Oh, you know, large potholes are like the startups here, he said. If you spot one soon enough and have planks ready, you can cover it when it rains and charge a toll for the crossing. Are you shitting me? I asked. Never. I knew people who dug them. I shook my head. The camp. There was a refugee camp on our way to Kisangani. The situation was unclear. The DRC Army officials were announcing that everything was under control, but nobody looked eager to risk leaving the camp. We weren't sure what to do, so we stood on the edge of camp, smoking. "Do you have anything to do with this?" I asked Dom. I was afraid of what he might say, but more afraid of not knowing. "I don't know," he sounded sincere. "Honestly, I just don't know. I wish I could tell you that I don't, but you don't really get to choose your clients, right?" "Adilia," he was grim. "I don't really control where the merchandise ends up, if that's what you mean." "I don't know, Adi." He looked tired. "I just don't know anymore." I realized that I knew nothing about him. Whom did he love? What were his dreams? What was he running from? Was he a good man? He trusted me enough to take me on this trip. And I trusted him. After all, we were friends. "Should we go or should we stay here for a couple of days?" he asked after some time. "Let's stay," I said. We didn't know if the roads were safe. Chapter 5. Notice the changes. Kisangani. I arrived there, bitter. The thoughts I'd been running from since the funeral were finally catching up to me. I looked around. Many names had been given to the city over the years. Once, it was called Falls Station because of its proximity to the Boyoma Falls. The current name meant the city on the island, in reverence to the tributaries that surrounded the city. Gold and diamond mines surrounded the city like an engagement ring, a promise of wealth and prosperity. The city itself dazzled me with its colonial architecture, its modernist hotels, its cathedral that mimicked the Notre Dame, its office blocks yearning to be the City of London's skyscrapers. I liked its style. It was alive and buzzing with culture. There were TV stations, newspaper stands, theaters, cinemas, and music venues everywhere I looked. Not so long ago, it was known as the most stylish city in Africa. Now, all I could see were the traces of war. Did you know that when Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart stayed in one of the hotels here, he was constantly drunk and she was constantly sick? Asked Dominic. Sick of him? I mean, he was cute. I shook my head, but I can understand being sick of a drunk man. He was drinking so she wouldn't get sick, explained Dominic. Oh. I looked at the slow, muddy waters of the Congo River. We looked at each other. Will we see that hotel? I asked. Dominic chuckled. I thought you'd asked about going down the river, like in the movie. The villa that had been used in the movie was no longer there, just a memory, like Katharine Hepburn and Humphrey Bogart. But memories wasn't why I was here. The Diamond Merchant. It took us a while to find it. Hey, is that what we're looking for? Dominic pointed on a mural on a wall across the street. Sandwiched between dull, beige buildings on a dusty road, the sheer white walls of the shop and the colorful picture painted across them were hard to miss. The mural depicted a man of two halves, cut down the middle by the shop's doorway. On one side was a thin, visibly hungry man holding a rough diamond in his right hand. On the other side was a tall, well-dressed man with a bag full of dollars in his left hand. This guy sure knows how to advertise, said Dominic. Who is he? It's a long story, I answered. A long time ago. We'd met at the LSE summer school. I never did find out what Joshua was doing there, but he had this specific Jewish charm around him. A little melancholic, a little depressed, and a lot of sex appeal. There was something about him that reminded me of Leonard Cohen. We'd slept with each other a couple of times, and then decided that we preferred talking to fucking. So we talked. When the summer ended, we switched to writing. You know, those long, detailed letters that were meant to replace hours of conversation. "Come to Africa," he wrote one time. "You'll find plenty of shit to write about here." Present day. Adi. Joshua hadn't changed much. He was a bit skinnier, and his face was darker and more wrinkled, but his eyes were still the same, curious, kind, and so brown they almost looked black. "You finally made it. How long's it been?" "Too long," I answered. He hugged me. "And who's your friend?" "Right, Dominic, meet Joshua." I introduced them. "Joshua, meet Dominic." "Dominic the war dog?" asked Joshua immediately. Dominic turned to me. "Seriously?" "Oh." I felt my cheeks turn red. "When I first met you, I wrote a letter to Josh, and..." Joshua stood there, barely able to hide his amusement. "But a war dog?" Dominic was not amused. "Dom, please, I can explain." "Don't worry. She's fond of nicknames," said Joshua. "She used to call me the Wandering Jew." He invited us inside. The huge desk that stood in the middle of the shop was covered in papers, cigarette butts, beer bottles, and some stones that looked like uncut diamonds. I was keen to meet his wife. "Is Jenna here?" "No, she's in Israel." Joshua shook his head. "Oh, are you two..." I was wary of putting my foot in it. "It's a long story. I'll tell you later. There's a customer I need to attend to." I turned around and saw a thin, nervous boy clutching something in his right hand. The look of deep hopefulness and hunger in his eyes made me indescribably sad. Voices in the night. We sat on the terrace. I was suddenly aware of the buzz of the insects in the background. Joshua had cooked some rice and chicken, and we talked about the recent events in our lives. Dominic was quite merciless about his nickname. "Oh, for fuck's sake, it was 20 years ago, and you were a soldier," I finally snapped. "But not a mercenary." I believe she meant it as a compliment. Joshua wasn't even trying to hide his amusement. Dominic shot me a glance that suggested I wasn't out of the woods quite yet. "I'm going to bed," he said. "If you hear sobbing, it's just me crying out my heart with my teddy bear." "Why? I said I was sorry." "I'm just tired," he smiled. When he was gone, Joshua shook his head. "You have a rare talent for making men go nuts around you," he said. "Oh, give me a break, will you?" I waved my hand dismissively. I know. It's all my fault," he said. "You mean Dom or Jenna?" I decided to cut to the chase. He mulled over his thoughts in silence. "What happened between you two?" I pushed. Joshua looked at me. "You didn't get my last letter, did you?" I shook my head. He sighed. "I sent my family to Israel, to my brother," he said. "You know, the one that runs the diamond cutting shop." "I know which brother. Why?" I was curious. "Oh." He took a swig from his bottle of beer. "Samuel was getting too African." "I can't see why that's a bad thing." I looked straight at him. "The kids here," he explained. "They drink, they use drugs, they sleep around, they spend every day on the river platforms diving and looking for treasure." "Aren't you a bit..." I hesitated. "Prejudiced?" "No, my dear," he said. "It's you who idealize this place. You always did." I live here, while you've spent the last 20 years dreaming of Africa and the safety of the European Union." "Okay," I said. "I'm listening." "Do you know how they dive for treasure here?" he asked. "Go on, tell me," I said, resigned. "The rivers are deep, so they tie sandbags or tin weights to their legs," he continued. "They hold this thin plastic pipe in their mouths, as tightly as I can. The pipes break, or they lose their grip on them, or the mud sucks them in, or there's a sudden rock slide, or it's so deep down there that they simply die of hypothermia. I know it happens because I saw it happen." He looked tired. "They just don't think. They don't seem to grasp the idea of cause and effect." "Now that's just plain racist of you." I shook my head. "Really, I met a boy once. He seemed to be eager to get an education, to actually make something of himself. And then he found a stone. I bought the stone, hoping he'd use the money to get out of here. You know what he did?" I shrugged and said nothing, and he kept talking. "The boy bought a motorcycle and some clothes. The bike got stolen, the clothes got torn, and he went diving for more stones. Guess what?" "He died?" I guessed. "They'd be Samuel's role models, you know, his classmates, his friends. And I want a future for him. I want him to have a choice like I did." We smoked in silence for a while. "How are you coping with being alone?" I asked quietly. He was silent for a moment. "Israel isn't my promised land. I'd have to start all over there. I'd be the oddball who lived in the jungle for 30 years. I listened. I don't even speak Hebrew, for fuck's sake. My folks use Yiddish at home. I don't belong there. I don't belong here either. But you know what? I don't mind." He took a deep breath and sighed. "That nickname you gave me." "Sorry," I smiled. "It fucking fits. I am the Wandering Jew." He put his empty bottle back down. "Why did you come back?" "I told you," but he wasn't buying it. "No, Adi, here, to see me." I brought my knees up to my chest, put my elbow on my knee, and smoked while looking into the darkness. The insects were even louder than before. I didn't want to answer. I sat there in silence until it was clear I wasn't going to, but he knew all too well about why I'd come back. Pure morning. The next day, I got up before Dominic and went for a walk around the city. I needed time to think. If someone had told me 6 months ago that I'd be back in this part of Africa, I wouldn't have believed them. And yet here I was, falling back into old habits, feeling more and more at home every day. Was this my real home? Was I too old to look for one? I didn't know.